General Hospital will reveal. As Sasha sat silently in the sterile stillness of the hospital examination room, the world around her seemed to blur into insignificance. Her thoughts consumed by the weight of everything she had been carrying in her heart. It was in that fragile moment, when the silence was almost soothing, that the sound of the door opening broke through her trance. Her breath caught in her chest as she looked up and saw Willow standing there, wearing a nurse's uniform. The sight of her, once a close companion, later a rival, and now something far more complicated, hit Sasha with a wave of emotion so overwhelming it nearly knocked the air from her lungs. This was not a reunion she had expected. And certainly not one she had wanted. The room, though small, suddenly felt immense and cold, the space between the two women thick with memories, regrets, and unspoken accusations. There was no joy in the way they looked at each other, only a cautious restraint, as though each word might detonate something dangerous. Both women had loved the same man, had built different versions of a future with him, and both had lived through the wreckage of those dreams. Willow, attempting to bridge the chasm between them, spoke of family, of Wiley and Amelia, of the Quartermain legacy, of healing for the sake of the children. She painted a picture of unity, of peace, of something resembling forgiveness and reconciliation. But to Sasha, her words sounded hollow, even cruel. The woman standing before her wasn't a peacemaker, she was the one who had fractured everything. How could she now speak of family, when she had dismantled it with her betrayal? Sasha didn't need time to gather her thoughts, her response came with quiet but undeniable fire. She reminded Willow, without raising her voice, without theatrics, that it was she who had abandoned Michael. It was she who had turned her back, who had made choices that could never be undone. The suggestion that Michael was the one who had distanced himself was, to Sasha, not only false but insulting. And then, Willow said something that stopped Sasha in her tracks. Willow, clearly distressed, claimed that Michael had refused to see her when she traveled all the way to Germany to visit him during his recovery. It wasn't just that he hadn't responded, it was that he had actively turned her away. Sasha's heart clenched. Something about that didn't sit right. Michael might have been in pain, might have been angry, but he wasn't cruel. He wouldn't simply reject someone he had once loved without at least hearing them out. Not the Michael she knew. The confusion gnawed at her long after Willow had gone. Later that day, in a chance encounter outside the hospital, Sasha found herself face to face with Jason. She hadn't planned on telling him anything, at least not yet, but as soon as she saw the concern in his eyes, the truth spilled out. She recounted the tense interaction with Willow, her claim about Michael's refusal, and the bitter implications behind it. She watched as Jason's calm expression shifted, his features tightening with suspicion. Jason had been the one to urge Willow to go to Germany in the first place. He had believed that a face-to-face meeting might begin the process of healing, or at the very least offer Michael some closure. But this didn't make sense. Michael wouldn't just shut the door in Willow's face, especially not after all they'd been through. Jason's instincts, honed from years of navigating dangerous terrain, told him there was more to the story, something hidden, something manipulated. And if there was one thing Jason Morgan couldn't abide, it was a lie wrapped in the guise of truth. He couldn't ignore the gnawing doubt that had taken hold. There was only one way to get answers. He had to see Michael himself. Not through calls, not through second-hand updates, he needed to look into his eyes and ask the questions only a brother could ask. The shadows around this situation were too deep, and Jason had learned long ago that where there were shadows, someone was hiding something. So he made arrangements. Quiet ones. No one needed to know he was leaving Port Charles, not yet. His journey to Germany wasn't just about answers, it was about protecting Michael. About uncovering whatever force had come between him and the truth. Jason had seen too much manipulation in his life to ignore the red flags now. And the deeper he thought about it, the more he began to suspect that someone with motive and access, had orchestrated the whole thing. Jason boarded the plane with a heaviness in his chest, but also with clarity. Whatever he found in Germany, he knew it would change everything. And deep down, he feared that the betrayal Michael had suffered was far worse than anyone in Port Charles could have imagined. Jason boarded the transatlantic flight under a shroud of deliberate secrecy, avoiding calls, questions, or even a farewell. This wasn't a mission of confrontation, but of understanding, one driven by a gnawing sense that something had gone deeply wrong. He landed in Germany as quietly as he had left Port Charles, stepping into the sharp, sterile chill of early morning air with the weight of unanswered questions pressing on his shoulders. The destination was a highly specialized burn rehabilitation facility nestled in the outskirts of Munich, a discreet location known more for its results than its publicity. It was here that Michael had been recovering ever since the devastating explosion at Sonny's penthouse, an inferno that had nearly taken his life and, in many ways, had already burned away pieces of who he used to be. Jason didn't alert the staff ahead of time. He didn't want to be announced, didn't want Michael to prepare a version of himself to present. He wanted the truth, not the polite facade of a patient, not the rehearsed script of a man trying to convince the world he was fine. He wanted to see his brother as he truly was, without masks, without warning. As he walked the echoing hallways lined with minimalist furnishings and the faint scent of antiseptic, memories flickered in his mind, memories of Michael as a boy. Of the fights they'd been through, the losses they'd endured. And now, he was about to face a version of Michael shaped by fire, by betrayal, and possibly by the darkest kind of isolation. When Jason finally reached the door to Michael's private room, he hesitated only briefly before pushing it open. What met him wasn't the broken shell of a man he had feared he might find, but someone far more complex. Michael sat upright in a chair by the window, sunlight casting harsh outlines over the gauze that still covered parts of his neck and left cheek. Though his wounds were healing physically, it was his eyes that told the real story. They were sharp, alert, haunted by fatigue and fury, but entirely lucid. This was not a man drowning in despair. This was a man who had survived something horrific and had come out on the other side with fire still burning inside him. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. Jason could see the flicker of recognition, followed by a flash of surprise, then an expression of restrained emotion, some mixture of guilt, relief, and barely concealed rage. Jason stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and approached slowly. There were no pleasantries exchanged, no empty comfort offered. The silence between them felt more truthful than words ever could. And it was Michael who broke it first, his voice low and hoarse from both injury and exhaustion. As they sat, the barriers began to fall, and Jason saw it all unravel, like thread pulled from a carefully woven tapestry. Michael didn't hide anything. He didn't have the strength or the will to keep up appearances any longer. Layer by layer, the truth began to emerge, not as a dramatic outburst, but as a slow, deliberate confession, every detail laced with bitterness and precision. Michael explained how, after the fire, he had drifted in and out of consciousness for weeks. In those vulnerable early days, Drew had positioned himself as the anchor, reassuring the doctors, managing the flow of information, even fielding messages from Port Charles. It was only later that Michael began to realize just how much had been filtered, altered, or simply erased. Willow's messages had never reached him. Her visit, it turned out, had been diverted entirely. She had never made it through the facility's front gate because Drew had quietly placed a "no visitors" restriction under the guise of protecting Michael's recovery. Medical staff had followed protocol. Willow had been turned away without explanation. But that wasn't the worst of it. Michael had started asking questions once he grew stronger. He requested call logs, email archives, visitor logs. What he uncovered horrified him. Drew hadn't just controlled access, he had actively sabotaged every attempt at communication between Michael and the outside world. He had posed as Michael in email responses, forged signatures, deleted messages, The betrayal was staggering, made worse by the knowledge that it had all been done under the pretense of helping and protecting him. Michael's voice trembled, not with weakness, but with tightly coiled anger, as he detailed each manipulation. His jaw clenched when he recounted how Drew had used the chaos to edge closer to Willow, presenting himself as the stable presence she needed during Michael's absence. The affair that followed had not been a spontaneous act of passion, but a calculated seduction built on lies and emotional isolation. Michael had been erased from his own life while Drew tried to take his place. Jason listened, his expression hardening with each new revelation. He had seen betrayal before, he had lived through his fair share of it, but this felt personal in a way that cut deeper. Michael wasn't just a casualty of circumstance. He had been targeted, silenced, and replaced by someone he had once considered family. Jason's fists curled at his sides, not in violence, but in resolve. There would be consequences. But first, the truth had to be exposed. Before Jason left the room, he pulled out a sealed folder from inside his jacket, notes and updates Sasha had given him, knowing how much it would mean to Michael. He handed it over without a word. Michael opened it and found photos of Sasha at her latest checkup, ultrasound scans, and a handwritten letter explaining everything, the baby, the lie about paternity, the reason behind it all. The stoic mask Michael wore finally cracked. For the first time in weeks, his eyes filled with tears that he didn't bother to hide. Sasha had been protecting him all along. Even while he lay in the dark, consumed by everything he thought he had lost. Jason didn't stay long after that. He had come for answers, and he had gotten them, but now, there was work to be done. The truth needed to be brought back to Port Charles. The lies had to be burned away, just like the fire that had nearly taken Michael's life. And Drew, for all his scheming and betrayal, was about to face something far more dangerous than exposure. He was about to face Jason Morgan's unwavering sense of justice. Michael's voice, though low and steady, carried the weight of betrayal so profound it sent a chill down Jason's spine. As he leaned forward in the quiet hospital room, Michael unspooled a truth that had been festering beneath the surface of his recovery, truths he had uncovered piece by piece, in moments of clarity between the haze of painkillers and trauma. Drew, the man who had once stood by his side as a trusted uncle and mentor, had meticulously dismantled his life during his most vulnerable hours. What once seemed like protection now revealed itself as possession. What once appeared to be guidance now looked like strategic control. Michael had not simply been abandoned, he had been deliberately isolated. According to Michael, Drew had weaponized every ounce of trust he had earned over the years. He didn't just seduce Willow while Michael lay helpless in a hospital bed halfway across the world. He staged an emotional coup, stepping into Michael's life as if it were a role to be claimed. But the physical betrayal was only the tip of a much darker operation. Drew had used his connections and influence to intercept communications, block visitors, and rewrite entire medical narratives. No one was allowed to reach Michael unless Drew permitted it. Messages from Port Charles never arrived. Willow's visit to Germany, which Michael had never known occurred, had been cut off at the gate, denied entry under doctor's orders, a lie Drew had coordinated with hospital staff by forging authorizations and manipulating treatment protocols. Michael, growing stronger and increasingly suspicious, had begun digging. What he found chilled him. There were medical files with altered timestamps. Entire folders of emails rerouted or deleted. Conversations he'd supposedly had with people back home that he never remembered, because they never happened. One particularly damning piece of evidence was a recorded exchange between Drew and a hospital administrator, in which Drew explicitly instructed the staff to prevent Willow from visiting, citing emotional instability and legal complications. All of it was orchestrated to isolate Michael, to remove him as a player on the chessboard so Drew could make his move, both in the family and in ELQ. As Michael handed Jason a thick manila folder brimming with documentation, copies of falsified reports, screenshots of tampered emails, transcripts, and voice recordings, his hands trembled slightly. Not from weakness, but from the enormity of what had been done to him. Jason accepted the file without a word, his jaw clenched, his eyes darkening with fury. This wasn't just about family drama. It was a calculated character assassination, an attempt to erase Michael from his own narrative. Drew hadn't just hurt Michael. He had deliberately reshaped reality to steal the very things Michael valued most, his family, his reputation, and his sense of self. But amidst the wreckage, there was still a lifeline. Jason, choosing his moment carefully, shifted the focus to Sasha, the one constant who had never betrayed Michael, never sought anything for herself. He told Michael everything. How Sasha had stepped up when no one else did, how she had quietly agreed to let the world believe her unborn child was Jason's to protect Michael from more scandal. How she endured Willow's judgment and the town's whispers without ever once speaking the truth. She had stood by him not for recognition, but because her love had never faded. Sasha had protected him even when he wasn't able to protect himself. Michael's reaction was visceral. His eyes welled with tears, lips parting slightly in disbelief. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of machines and the distant murmur of hospital activity beyond the door. He had thought he'd lost everything. But knowing Sasha had never stopped believing in him, never stopped loving him, that changed everything. The baby she carried, the one everyone assumed belonged to Jason, was his. His child. A new beginning born out of one reckless, pain-fueled night, but now transformed into something deeply meaningful. A second chance he didn't think he deserved, but one he would never take for granted. Jason stood, gripping the file tightly, knowing full well what needed to be done. His trip to Germany had not merely been a fact-finding mission, it had become a declaration of war. Drew had built his deceit on the assumption that no one would question him. But now Jason had the truth, and with it, the power to dismantle every lie that Drew had so carefully constructed. As he looked down at Michael one last time before leaving, Jason didn't offer promises or emotional speeches. That wasn't his style. But in his silence, there was an unspoken vow. He would expose Drew, restore Michael's place in his family and the company, and see to it that Sasha and the unborn child would be protected. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. What lay ahead would be a storm, one that would engulf not just Drew, but everyone who had enabled him, knowingly or not. There would be fallout, revelations, choices that couldn't be undone. Michael would return to Port Charles not as a victim, but as a man who had clawed his way back from the edge. And Sasha would no longer be seen as the woman who faded into the background, she would be recognized for the strength, resilience, and loyalty that had kept Michael grounded even when the world tried to tear him apart. But there were questions still lingering like embers in a burned-out room. Would Jason and Michael's counterattack be swift and effective, or would Drew find a way to slither deeper into power before he was exposed? Could Sasha, with all her scars and strength, find peace and happiness beside the man she had always loved? And Willow, now caught in a web she never fully understood, would she be offered redemption? Or left in the ashes of her own misguided choices? In a world like Port Charles, where loyalty is currency and secrets are weapons, truth is rarely just the light that clears away darkness. Sometimes, it's the fire that consumes everything built on lies. And this time, that fire had a name, Jason Morgan.